This is the Temple of Aphaea. It sits on a hill overlooking the Aegean Sea. To the north, the island of Salamis and all the busyness of Piraeus port. But out here, not quite mid-morning, it was just us, the cicadas, and a few local cats. It's a Doric temple, that's an architectural style from about 2,500 years ago. The temple on this site was a rebuild of a temple from around 570 BC, though it's believed that cult activity on the site may go almost a millennia further back. After the 570 temple burned down, they used a bunch of pieces of it to build the terrace to support the new structure. And while we don't have written accounts of the temple from this time, dating of between 510 to 470 BC has been put forward by comparing it to various similar projects such as the Athenian treasury at Delphi. And I defy anyone not to be moved by this. There's definitely not places like this on every corner in Greece, but it is whiplash coming from an English context where, if it's any older than a Roman site, it's probably a bump in the grass. And I'm not knocking bumps in the grass. We spent 17 episodes looking at hill forts, and the series is barely a third done yet. There are a few exceptions nationally, but if we're talking about 2,500 years ago in England, this is likely all you're going to be seeing today. If you reach out to the extremities of the British Isles, maybe this, but having somewhere like this, 2,500 years old and surviving in this incredible condition, it's one of the treats about being in Greece, one of many, that the ancient past is not a faint trace in the soil. Now, often it's just a few fragments. I've definitely seen more temples that are this rather than this, but the fact that something this precious can survive at this height, 2,500 years, what a gift. This alone would unsurprisingly be a reason enough to revisit this island that we'd caught all the way back before we were filming travel episodes, before we'd seen everything we have across the Mediterranean world. At the time, Jen and I were only married a year, and we came to Aegina as part of our first ever trip to Athens. So you can imagine that after all this time, coming back here would feel pretty special. But of course, there was more to catch too. So it seems like we should put an intro here. We are Forest Archaic Collective, and as well as making jungle drum and bass, we followed ancient sites across Europe and beyond, whether it's Neolithic standing stones, Roman arches, or Romanesque churches. If it's ancient, we're into it. Now, this episode is one of our shorter ones, but that's actually a nice change, and while Aegina Island is neither especially large nor filled with a lifetime of things to explore, I figured it warranted much more than just a footnote in the Athens episode. On our trip in 2018, it was one of Jen's picks. It was nice, though just through the weather lottery, the weather had been pretty cloudy all that day. We got a look at the temple, got a lot of pics, but no video. We weren't filming at that point. Plus, this was nice, but I can't lie, it would have been nicer under blue skies, so I'd been determined to make it back and get a better look at everything this time. So picking up from the conspicuous gap in the last episode, metro to Piraeus, jostling through the rather grimy busyness of the streets around, which even before 7 a.m. were heaving with cars, people and police, blowing whistles at the cars and occasionally the people. Having browsed nearly 10 ships trying to pass which one was ours, it was a nice chance to sit down and watch the frenetic chaos of Piraeus from a distance. And at length we were on our way passing out of the port with the island of Salamis looming large. It was a pretty uneventful crossing. It took about an hour and a half, which is just slightly longer than advertised. There are faster services. Aegina is visible on the horizon as soon as you leave the harbour, but it takes a while before you can get a better look, with rugged hills rising in the centre and settlements and houses dotted along the coast. Aegina is part of the Saronic Islands group, which are not among the more famous island chains in Greece, such as the huge Ionian islands of Corfu, Kefalonia and Zakynthos to the west, or the Cyclades, whose whitewashed streets and church domes often serve as the poster child for Greece worldwide. You can catch all of these in the Greek playlist we've got, so definitely have a flick back through that. But while you won't be finding huge international airports here, that's principally down to them being a pretty straightforward hop from Athens by ferry if you can just navigate Piraeus. And while I'd not been in Athens fully 24 hours yet, they do of course make a change of pace from the busyness of the city. The main town and port of Aegina is on the western side. The classic disembark from the ferry is a lot of noise and petrol fumes. Once you get away from the tarmac, Aegina town is, it's not tiny, it's quite small in feel. There are these older looking buildings being propped up by the scaffolding, low angle flag shot. We'll be exploring around here a little better later on. Even though I wasn't really trying to do this visit did end up following pretty closely to the contours of our previous visit. I've compared itineraries to packing the freezer. You rarely get to choose the exact order in which you would like to do things, particularly when public transport links and the opening times of archaeological sites are involved. Very quickly you find that you'll need to do the day in a particular order or else miss out on some things that you'll regret. In this case, it's perhaps unsurprising that I wanted to get to the temple before any big coach loads did. So yeah, much like last time, began with getting off the ferry and virtually straight onto a bus, and we were pulling out of town. The main bus that crosses the north of the island between the main town of Aegina to the smaller east coast town of Aegina, I could scarcely stop grinning this bus ride. If you're familiar with the route, that might seem puzzling. There's some nice views, but if I may, being back in Greece less than 24 hours so far, just everything was making me the happiest I'd felt in years. It's all the small details like the shops, the familiar feel, the landscape. I hope I never grow tired of all this. For all the trips we've made here, and you can see them in the playlist, it always cheers me up no end being back. And of course, I quickly run into the limits of how I can accurately convey that. I can just say it. I can show you the videos of glorious blue skies and beautiful landscapes. I can put music in the background that tries to make up the shortfall of expressing just how this felt. But it's never going to be able to fully express it. I've loved making videos. Getting on a plane and getting out of the UK has been one of the things I hadn't realised I was missing earlier in my adult years. I hadn't realised just how much of a missing piece this would be. How I'd feel like I'd found not something brand new, but a part of myself I'd been waiting to get back. The high I felt of listening to Balearic trance as a teenager and sort of staring out at the horizon in West Sussex, feeling like I was missing something that was happening somewhere out there, somewhere else. And then actually being able to find that feeling, to find it in a place that it wasn't imaginary, that when I actually flew over that horizon, I'd be able to inhabit it. That has been the most extraordinary life turnaround for me. So yes, I think you'll take my full meaning when I say just how good this felt. We passed this monastery, which is one major stop where a lot of people get off the bus. It's pretty grand. Having seen many churches like this over the years since I last passed this way, you can see pretty clearly now how new this is. I'm sure it's lovely inside. I usually prioritise places that are much older, and goodness knows Greece has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to ancient monasteries. So got off the bus at the turnoff just before it descends into Aegina, just walking up the road as the day was heating up, and the satisfaction of having a site like this to myself. Yeah, I spend my life trying to be at the gate of archaeological sites for the minute it opens, just so you can maybe get a few minutes where there aren't people in shot. Of course, for some places as busy as, say, the Parthenon or others, this is close to impossible, short of having a production office that books you a shooting slot outside of opening hours and paying. I've no idea what that would cost, but the satisfaction of getting those shots sans people. It's no surprise that if you're trying to get shots of places to be evocative, any power lines, cars, or people in bright raincoats does kind of take you out of it. There was a young family that came in maybe 10-15 minutes after me, but other than it's not hard to frame them out, it was actually nice to see their kids get such joy out of the space as well. The museum was not open at this point, which was a shame. It was still being renovated or rebuilt or something like that. I was just thrilled to be here. There are also some dwellings on the east of the site described as priests' houses. So just personally felt like £1 million British on this morning and needed to have a celebratory espresso from the cafe there, a great spot for an espresso vanity shot and a sizable population of local cats. Just something to keep an eye on. The temple is not open on Tuesdays. Across Greece, the majority of heritage sites are run by the same organisation, and the majority are closed on Tuesdays. I really wonder how many folks got the boat all the way over only to discover, nope. So from here, there's a dirt track down to the town. Again, not surprising considering the circumstances, this was basically beat for beat what we did last trip. The difference being, back on that day, apart from the grey taking a lot of the joy out of it, it was early May, and in Greece, the season where everything's all open gets narrower the further out you are. just seems it's hard to float a shop or cafe here much outside of May to mid-September. So Aya Marina may seem a little empty outside of high season, but on this day there were plenty of folks out enjoying the beaches. I wouldn't hate staying here for a few days on somewhat more of a quiet break, except, well, I mean, I don't really ever do quiet breaks. Other than I can't afford it or afford the time off, I'd just be gnawing my fingers off to get somewhere and be filming other things. Anyway, just getting a drink and a snack. Saw the same place we got a Euros last time. Around then it was one of the few places that was open. Found the bus stop. I haven't filled in much of the details on the bus, but it's pretty easy to figure out. That's the thing with Greece. There are the KTEL websites and schedules, but it is infinitely easier just to figure it out on the ground when you're there. That's a bit nerve-wracking, and if you've got something that needs to happen, sure, but it almost always turns out fine. It's one of those funny things that once you've done it, it kind of seems really obvious. But yeah. Back across the island, I am sorry to say there was a point I'd meant to get to that I missed. Across Greece, and particularly the islands, when tougher times came following, for example, the decrease in Byzantine naval power in the region and the turbulent centuries of the Middle Ages, many coastal areas were under near constant threat of piracy, and many settlements moved to higher places inland just for defence. On Aegina, there's a hill pretty much dead in the middle of the roughly triangular island, and this is Paleohora. It would have been a lengthy, hot walk up, and I did want to do this, but there were just other constraints on my time, and while I backed and forth, ultimately the bus times meant this would just have to get dropped, which was a shame. Maybe I'll be able to catch this on another trip. I definitely wouldn't need much convincing to come back here if I can afford it and get time. Anyway, I can't catch everything all the time, ever. Greece just has too much incredible history. It's pretty much a lifetime worth of places in just one nation. So the bus pulled back into Aegina town, and I'd made sure to be back in good time and missed Paleohora because last time we'd not got back with enough time to catch this, the ruins of ancient Aegina. And you can see it rather beautifully situated on this rise just by the water, the Temple of Apollo in the middle. I've lost track of what's happening with opening times for this. It's closed on some days, and I think, at least at this point, it was closed earlier in the afternoon, hence I had to get a move on to catch it. There's a whole scatter of different structures from different eras here. The boundary wall survives pretty well to the north. Much as I won't unpack it exhaustively in this episode, something I had not appreciated. In amongst these structures from around the sort of classical to Roman era, there are also traces of Bronze Age occupation. So suddenly I was paying much closer attention. These curvier, more rough-built walls here, the diagram breaks it down more precisely. But that was very exciting. It's something I caught just a couple of days ago at time of writing while I was heading through London. This is the Aegina treasure. While excavated on Aegina, you can see the distinctly Minoan motifs. In fact, there is speculation it may have actually been excavated near Malia on Crete, as its provenance was never fully confirmed. But the lavish styling, and we know there was Minoan influence here on the island. It's always been an open question about the degree to which the Minoans projected power outwards, whether it was more about trade or if they actually had military garrisons on other islands or regions. You have a watch of our Crete episodes in the Greek playlist to see a lot more from the Minoans. So all of this was a thrill to catch. It's something I didn't film. I took a quick swim here, partly because the day had gotten me so sweaty by this point. It was a quick dip, but it felt incredible to cool off, and the beach here was quiet, barely anyone else there. I didn't have a towel, but the day was more than hot enough to drip dry in a matter of minutes, and with that I afforded myself a bit of time to explore the town without rushing. Sat down for some lunch. You might have gathered from the Athens episode that I was subsisting on espresso, beer and gyros, and this was no exception, and I have no regrets about that whatsoever. The streets were nice, though definitely wasn't attempting to snap everything. One thing I did need to catch, you can see that the town is fairly modern. Most buildings here likely going up in the last 70-ish years. The churches are likewise pretty modern builds. I mentioned you can see somewhat older buildings near the harbour, but there's an exception to all of these. Tucked in an otherwise unremarkable part of town, this is the Tower of Markos, and it's a trace of the Venetian control of the island, the second Venetian era of control to be more precise. A few of you who've been around the channel will have pricked their ears up, but for those who don't know, and we're trying to do a sort of semi-regular segment about things you probably don't know about, but definitely should. The Venetian Republic is essentially never talked about in England. I would probably count as a bit of a history nerd as a kid, but I had never heard about this before we got travelling. And discovering the just incredible places that the Republic reached was one of the main things that was driving us to get out into Europe when we were just starting out making episodes. And we are partway through a series chasing these places all the way from Italy down the Dalmatian coast of Croatia and Montenegro, all the way out to Crete and Cyprus in the east. We've still got more of those to make. The last couple of years we've been catching the Venetians around the Cyclades, where a lot of their structures are quite well hidden, or certainly not as prominent as other fortifications the Venetians put up. But yes, load that playlist up either from the top right or the description. Quite apart from being fascinating, as you're already seeing, it really is a feast for the eyes. So if you just want to have it playing in the background somewhere, definitely fine with that too. I don't know when we'll be able to go and fill in the missing pieces for the second half of that series, but when we do, we'll definitely have more details on Aegina during the Venetian rule. With that, I was keeping an eye on the clock as I had a return boat to catch. If you've ever tried to catch a ferry between maybe some of the Cyclades or any other Greek island chains, you'll know that the ferries are not like bus or train times with some consideration of convenience when it comes to times or frequency. You just have to try and work around the few you're given, sometimes just one a day for smaller islands and out of season, maybe none on some days. Well, at this point, Aegina had maybe 20 odd sailings from a few different companies. I mean, I can scarcely recall a time that I need worry so little about missing my boat. For the sake of half an hour and about €10, I could have caught another. I did have some other time-sensitive bits to catch in Athens, hence not just staying around for longer, which meant, there were some things I didn't catch. I'm not sure. I can't actually remember why I didn't catch the main Aegina Museum. It was doubtless some combination of opening times or... I'm not sure. But to vary it up a little bit, I was getting back on a faster route. This is a hydrofoil, also known as a flying dolphin. It crosses much faster than the car ferries, so we were speeding across the Saronic Gulf, and that concluded Aegina for this time. Apart from all the great things I'd caught on this day, just the feeling of being back, feeling like being newly married, and when we were just beginning to explore Greece in those early years. Greece does have that incredible way of making me feel young again. Actually, I'm still comparatively young. Okay, Greece makes me continue to feel young. And it's really just all the little things that brought it all back. I've mentioned it before on the channel, but the aroma of baked pine needles is just the most beautiful fragrance. And when combined with the soundtrack of the cicadas in the trees, there's numerous accounts of non-responsive people in care homes being played some Glenn Miller or whatever music from their childhood and becoming animated again. So if a 90-year-old me is in a vegetative state in hospital one day, if someone could just go to Greece, grab a few handfuls of these, maybe a quick field recording of the cicadas, I'm sure I'll snap right back. Some Racco Mello wouldn't go amiss either. So it was back to Athens. You can catch all of that in the previous episode if you haven't seen that. And next time, we had one more loose end from the area. We're going to be heading to a very different island indeed. In fact, one that's probably not on your radar if you're in the English-speaking world. This is a place that gets barely a fraction of the tourists elsewhere in Greece, and most people don't even realise that this huge chunk of what appears to be more mainland is actually separated, even if just by a tiny bit of water. So next time, we're going to be going to Evia. If you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. We've been mentioning a bunch of playlists already. It really helps out if you just kind of have those on and let them play, and there's so much more to see. But these episodes do take a while. You might have caught that this is actually from nearly 2 years ago. It's quite a backlog we're working through. So if you catch us on Blue Sky, you can sort of see what we're doing on much more of a week-by-week basis. So please do subscribe and hit the bell icon. I say that because we're in this weird position where the views we're getting is only a fraction of the people who've subscribed. I just can't believe that about 4,800 plus people have suddenly completely lost interest in us. It just doesn't make any sense. So basically, if you don't hit the bell icon, you'll probably just never hear from us again, as YouTube just buries our stuff or doesn't show it to people. So please do that, and we'll catch you very soon.